The woods were always quiet in the valley, except for the nights when the wind carried whispers, low, trembling voices that seemed to remember things the living had long forgotten. Locals spoke of a cabin hidden past the black oaks, where light flickered even when no one lived there. They said a woman once stayed within those rotting walls, a woman who loved so fiercely it defied blood, law, and God himself. Eleanor Mayfield had vanished from town decades ago. Some said heartbreak drove her into the trees. Others claimed madness ran in her family, that her mother, too, had spoken to ghosts and loved a man she should not have loved. For years, no one dared approach the cabin. Hunters who tried said the woods twisted around them, paths leading them back to where they started, as if the forest itself protected her secret. Then, one autumn evening, a stranger came walking up the mountain road. He was young, quiet, and carried a photograph of a woman he called Mother. His name was Samuel. No one realized it at the time, but his arrival awakened something sleeping beneath the soil, something that had waited 15 years for him to return. When the sun set that night, the woods seemed to breathe differently. The crickets fell silent. The air grew thick, almost watchful. In the distance, a candle flickered behind a broken windowpane. Inside the cabin, Eleanor stood trembling, staring at the face of the man she had once rocked to sleep, and now could not look away from. Deep within the dense wilderness of rural Kentucky, there exists a place the locals dare not wander after dark, a place where the trees seem to whisper secrets and the wind carries the faint sound of a woman's cry. The hidden cabin, tucked far from any beaten path, is said to be older than the town itself. Its wooden walls, weathered and blackened with time, lean under the weight of countless storms and stories buried within. Moss crawls over the roof like nature's attempt to conceal what humanity wished to forget. For decades, it has stood alone in the woods, its windows covered with dust, its door half-rotted, and yet, on certain nights, a faint light is seen glowing through the cracks. Those who've seen it say it flickers like a heartbeat, slow, pulsing, alive. The cabin was once a home, though now it breathes only the memory of what it witnessed. It was built generations ago by the Mayfield family, a name that carried both pride and curse through the region. No one remembers who first left the cabin behind or why, but there are stories that the land itself rejected the family, that crops withered near their soil, animals grew restless, and even the river changed its path to avoid flowing near their home. Over time, the structure became less a dwelling and more a relic of sorrow, a silent tomb for the love and madness that had taken place within. Children of the nearby town were warned to stay away. Their parents spoke of strange footprints appearing in the mud long after the place was thought abandoned. Some claimed to hear a woman's voice humming an old lullaby from the trees, a melody so gentle and so broken that even the birds fell quiet when it played. Hunters who passed through said they sometimes found signs of fresh firewood stacked by the door or a candle burning on the windowsill, though no one ever saw who tended to them. It became a place between life and death, memory and forgetting, untouched by time but never truly empty. When the story begins, the cabin stands as both setting and character, its silence heavy with unspoken things. Inside, beneath the layers of dust and decay, lies evidence of a life once lived, a cracked mirror above the fireplace, a rocking chair that still sways when the wind howls, and a photograph turned face down on the mantel. Every inch of that forgotten home hums with history, the kind that refuses to die, the kind that waits. And in the heart of those shadowed woods, the cabin keeps its secret, patiently, as if it knows the day will come when the past returns to claim what it left behind. Eleanor Mayfield lived as if the world had forgotten her, and perhaps it truly had. For nearly 2 decades, she had not set foot beyond the tree line that surrounded her cabin. The people in the nearby town spoke her name only in whispers, often when the nights turned cold and fires burned low. They called her the ghost in the pines, a woman both alive and dead, seen only by those who wandered too far. Some swore they had glimpsed her pale figure at dusk, standing at the edge of the woods with a lantern in her hand, her eyes searching for something no one else could see. Others said she was a widow driven mad by loss, while the crueler ones claimed she had been cursed by her own sins. Whatever the truth, Eleanor had become a story, one that the living feared but could not stop telling. Inside her cabin, time stood still. The walls were lined with old photographs, their faces faded but familiar to her alone. A tattered shawl still hung by the door, waiting for shoulders that would never again cross its threshold. The smell of dried lavender and wood smoke lingered in the air, mingling with something colder, something unspoken. Eleanor moved through the rooms like a shadow, her hands trembling as if she carried the weight of memories too heavy to set down. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the groan of the trees outside, seemed to echo a name she had tried to forget. In town, people remembered her differently. Once, long ago, she had been known for her beauty, soft-spoken, with eyes that held both sorrow and kindness. Men would pause when she passed, women would lower their voices, and children would stare at the golden-haired woman who always smiled but never laughed. Then one day she was gone. No goodbye, no letter, no reason. Only her home left behind, empty and silent. Rumors filled the space she had vacated, a lover who vanished, a child who died, a sin too shameful to speak aloud. But none of them guessed how close to the truth they were. Eleanor herself no longer knew if she was alive or simply existing. Each morning, she awoke to the same silence, the same ache, and the same memory of a face she could not erase. The forest had become her only companion, its stillness matching the rhythm of her lonely heart. And yet, despite the years of solitude, something in her waited, something patient, restless, and unresolved, as if part of her knew that what she had buried in the past was not finished with her yet. The boy who had once vanished into the world returned as a man, carrying the weight of a name he barely understood. Samuel Mayfield walked the narrow road that led to the forgotten woods with quiet determination, guided by little more than an old photograph and the hollow echo of memories too faint to trust. The picture, worn at the edges, showed a woman with soft eyes and a haunted smile, his mother, Eleanor. He had not seen her since he was a child, since the day he was taken away after whispers of madness and tragedy consumed their family. For 15 long years, he had wandered from one town to another, searching for something that felt like belonging. But no matter where he went, the shadows of his past followed, whispering his mother's name in his dreams. When he reached the outskirts of the forest, the world grew unnaturally still. The trees loomed tall and dark, their roots twisting across the earth like fingers guarding a buried secret. Locals he passed on the road warned him not to go farther, their eyes filled with quiet fear. They told him no one lived there anymore, that the woman he sought was long dead, or worse, that she wasn't entirely gone. But Samuel ignored them. There was a pull inside him, an ache that drew him toward that lonely patch of land as though the soil itself recognized his blood. As he stepped into the forest, every sound seemed sharper, the crunch of leaves, the distant cry of a crow, the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He felt watched, though not by danger, but by memory. The deeper he went, the more the forest seemed to change around him. The air grew thick, the light dimmed, and a strange familiarity crept in, as though he were walking through a dream he had once lived. Then, through the veil of branches, he saw it, the cabin, half swallowed by vines and decay, its roof sagging, its windows dark. It was exactly as he had imagined it in his nightmares. Standing before the door, Samuel hesitated. A faint smell of smoke lingered in the air, and for a moment, he thought he heard the soft hum of a lullaby drifting from within, the same melody his mother used to sing when he was small. His chest tightened, and he felt both dread and longing rise inside him. Slowly, he reached for the handle, the wood cold beneath his fingers. The door creaked open, revealing a dim room lit by the last breath of daylight. And there she was, older, frailer, but unmistakably her. Eleanor turned toward him, her eyes widening, her lips trembling as she whispered the name she had not spoken aloud in 15 years. The moment their eyes met, a strange and unsettling warmth settled between them, something that neither memory nor reason could explain. Samuel had expected a mother's embrace, perhaps a gentle hand brushing back his hair, a quiet word of reassurance. Instead, he found himself caught in the intensity of Eleanor's gaze, a look that held both the weight of absence and something darker, something forbidden that pulsed just beneath the surface. Her hands lingered on his shoulders longer than was natural, her touch hesitant yet charged with an urgency that made the air between them thrum. He felt a shiver pass through him, a mixture of recognition and disorientation, as though he were seeing a reflection of himself in the eyes of the woman who had birthed him. Eleanor spoke softly, her voice trembling, recounting fragments of his childhood, details only a mother could know. But the tenderness in her tone twisted in ways Samuel could not name, weaving guilt and fascination together. There was an intensity in the way she studied his face, tracing features that mirrored her own, that mirrored her younger self in ways that should have been impossible. The resemblance was uncanny, yet it ignited in her a longing that defied the moral boundaries she had spent years trying to uphold. Every smile, every word, every glance seemed to stretch across years of isolation and loneliness, collapsing the distance between mother and son into a single, charged moment. Samuel, for his part, felt the confusion of a lifetime returning all at once. He had longed for his mother's love, imagined it countless times during the years of abandonment, but what greeted him now was something he did not understand. The intensity of her presence overwhelmed him. It was not just a reunion, it was a collision of emotions that made his head swim. He could feel the pull of family, yes, but also something unspoken and dangerous, a magnetic force that seemed to twist affection into obsession. He recoiled and leaned in, hesitated, unsure if the feelings stirring inside him were of nurture, desire, or a disturbing combination of both. As hours passed and the shadows of the cabin grew longer, the line between past and present, memory and reality, began to blur. Eleanor found herself confessing regrets and longings that should have remained buried, while Samuel, caught between shock and empathy, felt a forbidden curiosity awaken within him. The walls of the cabin seemed to shrink around them, pressing them closer, amplifying the tension that neither could escape. Outside, the woods were silent, the air thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, but inside, the atmosphere crackled with a quiet, insidious intensity. Every gesture, every whispered word, seemed to tiptoe on the edge of propriety, a dangerous dance neither of them could halt, each moment dragging them deeper into a connection that should have been impossible, yet felt inevitable. As Samuel and Eleanor's presence in the cabin became more than a fleeting reunion, the nearby town began to stir with unease. It started with whispers at the general store, hushed conversations behind closed doors, and cautious glances exchanged between neighbors who had long told themselves that the forest had swallowed the Mayfields and left their secrets buried. Farmers returning from their fields spoke of strange lights flickering between the trees at night, small orange glows that appeared and disappeared like will-o'-the-wisps. Some claimed to hear low, wailing cries carried on the wind, a sound neither human nor animal, but something in between, as if the very woods were mourning or warning. Mothers would pull their children inside earlier, locking doors and shuttering windows, while fathers muttered prayers under their breath, fearing the darkness that had been awakened once more. Stories grew bolder as the nights lengthened. Hunters passing through the forest reported glimpses of movement in the shadows, two figures, a man and a woman, moving together in unnatural synchrony, lingering near the cabin but never leaving. Dogs refused to approach the edge of the woods, growling at invisible presences. Even the birds seemed to vanish, leaving an oppressive silence that blanketed the surrounding fields. No one dared enter the forest themselves, yet no one could stop themselves from talking about it. Fear mixed with fascination, and soon, every passing stranger became the subject of speculation. Was it Samuel returning home, or some phantom conjured by the restless trees? Was Eleanor alive, or merely a spectre of memory, feeding on the fears of those who remained in the light? The whispers evolved into rumors, and rumors into panic, though still no one approached the cabin directly. It was as if the town itself had agreed to maintain a cautious distance, acknowledging the old stories while refusing to confirm them. Even those who had once known Eleanor as a gentle, shy girl now imagined her as something darker, a woman touched by the madness that seemed to linger in the forest's depths. Local children dared one another to run past the tree line, but always returned pale and silent, eyes wide with terror, muttering about shadows that moved too quickly to be human and voices that called their names from the blackened woods. As the weeks passed, the tension in the town grew heavier. Gossip mingled with superstition, and soon the presence of the two figures in the cabin became a symbol of everything the townspeople feared: forbidden love, hidden sin, and the unspoken possibility that the past could reach out and consume the present. What had begun as curiosity had become obsession. The town watched, waited, and whispered, feeling the pulse of something ancient and dangerous throbbing just beyond their sight. And all the while, the cabin remained untouched by fear, standing silently among the pines, as though daring the world to uncover what it had so carefully protected for generations. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the dense canopy of oaks and maples, Samuel stumbled upon something that would shatter the fragile sense of reality he had tried to build since leaving the cabin so many years ago. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the corner of the main room, he discovered a small, dust-covered diary bound in cracked leather. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the words inside had a power that seemed to breathe life back into the cabin itself. Samuel recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to his grandmother, a woman he had never met but whose presence had always lingered like a shadow over his family. Each line was a thread connecting him to a history of secrecy, obsession, and a darkness that had been carefully passed down through generations. As he read, Samuel felt the air grow heavier, almost as if the cabin itself were leaning in to listen. The diary spoke of a family curse, one that had haunted the Mayfields for decades. It told of love that had turned unnatural, of longing that had twisted into obsession, and of events that had repeated themselves over and over, each generation mirroring the last. Eleanor had inherited this history in silence, carrying the weight of actions no one else had survived to remember. The entries spoke of forbidden desires, of hidden rooms and secret passages within the cabin, of eyes watching from the darkness, and of voices that could only be heard by those who shared the family blood. Every revelation in the diary seemed to illuminate Eleanor's strange behavior and the intensity with which she had welcomed Samuel back into her life. Samuel read of warnings and confessions, of failed attempts to resist impulses that had driven his ancestors to acts too terrible to be spoken aloud. There were references to his own birth, cryptic and veiled, suggesting that the boundaries of morality had long been blurred in the family line. The diary hinted at cycles that could not be broken, patterns repeating like echoes in the forest surrounding the cabin. Samuel could feel the pull of the past pressing on him, the invisible hand of generations demanding acknowledgement, dragging him closer to truths that should have remained buried. By the time the light had faded from the windows, Samuel's understanding of his mother, his grandmother, and even himself had changed irreversibly. He realized that Eleanor's love, as unnerving as it was entwined with the weight of family history, a history written in secrecy and sustained by the isolation of the cabin. The diary had opened a door, not just to forgotten memories, but to the knowledge that the sins, obsessions, and desires of those who came before were never truly gone. They lingered, waiting patiently for the right moment, for the right person, to continue a story that had already begun centuries earlier. It happened one quiet evening when Eleanor sat by the fading light of the fireplace, her eyes fixed on Samuel as he moved about the cabin with the careful hesitation of a stranger in a place he once called home. The shadows cast by the flames danced across his face, highlighting the striking resemblance between mother and son, and Eleanor felt a chill pass through her as though she were staring into a mirror of her younger self. The familiar curve of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, the slope of his shoulders, all of it reflected a version of herself that she had buried beneath years of solitude and regret. In that moment, time seemed to collapse, and the years spent apart vanished into a dizzying illusion of continuity. She could see the little boy she once held in her arms, the boy who had been ripped from her care, and the man he had become, and it was all the same face, all the same heart. Eleanor's pulse quickened, a mixture of nostalgia and something far darker. It was not simply recognition, it was an obsessive, aching fascination that pulled at her with every glance. She found herself tracing his movements with her eyes, memorizing the way he stood, the tilt of his head, the faint tremor in his hands. The reflection she saw in Samuel's presence was intoxicating, almost unbearable in its intensity, a reminder of lost time and lost opportunities. Every memory of motherhood and longing merged with something that should have been forbidden, creating a knot of desire and guilt she could not untangle. Her thoughts became a storm, alternating between tenderness and obsession, love and shame, each stronger than the last. Samuel, for his part, noticed the way Eleanor lingered on him, the almost imperceptible hesitation in her voice, the trembling of her fingers when she reached toward him. There was an intensity there that both alarmed and unnerved him, a heat that should have been maternal but was layered with something else, an unspoken hunger that left him off balance. He caught glimpses of it in her eyes, the way she watched him as if trying to memorize every detail, every expression, every line of his face. It unsettled him, yet he could not look away. The reflection of her younger self in him made him feel both connection and fear, as if he were standing at the edge of a precipice with no clear path back to solid ground. As the night deepened and the shadows stretched across the cabin walls, Eleanor's obsession intensified. The mirror of Samuel's presence forced her to confront parts of herself she had tried to hide, to deny, and to control. The resemblance was not just physical, it was emotional, a resonance of shared history, shared longing, and shared darkness. Every glance into his eyes became a dangerous journey into the past, a reminder that the boundaries between mother and son, between memory and desire, had become porous and fragile, ready to collapse entirely under the weight of years spent apart. The storm arrived without warning, rolling over the forested hills like an angry tide, turning the sky to steel and sending the wind shrieking through the trees. Rain pelted the cabin in relentless sheets, striking the roof and windows with a ferocity that seemed almost alive. The forest groaned and swayed, branches scraping against the walls, as though the very woods themselves were protesting the intensity of what was about to unfold inside. Eleanor and Samuel were trapped, isolated by the sudden deluge, the world beyond the cabin reduced to nothing more than darkness and the roar of the storm. The air between them grew thick with unspoken tension, the kind of pressure that compresses every thought, every feeling, until it demands release. Inside, the cabin felt smaller than ever, the shadows stretching long and trembling as the lightning flashed through the cracks in the walls. The fire had dimmed, its warmth flickering against the cold dampness that seeped through the wood. Eleanor moved with a nervous precision, arranging the few blankets and chairs as if creating a temporary sanctuary, yet her movements betrayed the turmoil within. Every glance she cast toward Samuel lingered too long, every word she spoke carried a weight of longing and hesitation that made the room itself tremble with intensity. Samuel, sensing the storm both outside and inside, felt his own pulse quicken. There was comfort in her presence, but it was laced with confusion, an edge of danger that neither of them could fully name. As the hours passed, the storm seemed to become a living force, pressing them together in a cabin that was too small for the emotions swirling between them. Eleanor's confessions slipped from her lips in whispers, fragments of memories and desires she had long kept buried. She spoke of love twisted by isolation, of longing made unbearable by separation, and of a bond that had survived years of absence. Samuel listened, torn between shock, empathy, and the strange pull he could not deny. The sound of the rain against the windows became a rhythm that matched their hearts, a cadence of fear, anticipation, and forbidden fascination. Lightning illuminated the room in sharp bursts, revealing the intensity of their shared gaze, the trembling of hands, the unspoken recognition of boundaries being tested. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, a chaotic reflection of emotions that could no longer be contained. As thunder shook the cabin and shadows danced across the walls, the night became a crucible, pressing them into moments of truth, desire, and guilt. The isolation, the darkness, and the relentless pounding of rain forced them to confront the bond that neither could define nor deny, a bond that carried with it the weight of blood, memory, and a dangerous, inescapable attraction. Each moment pressed upon them like the storm itself, relentless, consuming, and impossible to ignore, until the line between fear and longing, between love and something forbidden, blurred entirely. The discovery came unexpectedly, as though the forest itself had decided it was time for the truth to surface. A local hunter, Thomas Weaver, had been tracking deer along a familiar trail when the edge of the storm-swollen woods revealed something unnatural. The ground near the cabin, normally covered with thick moss and fallen leaves, seemed disturbed, the earth turned up in neat mounds as if freshly dug. Curiosity overcame caution, and Thomas approached, the hairs on the back of his neck rising as the wind shifted and carried the faint scent of damp soil and decay. The rain-soaked ground squelched under his boots, each step heavier than the last, each breath tighter in his chest. As he neared the mounds, the outlines became unmistakable, two graves, shallow but deliberate, freshly disturbed in a place thought abandoned for decades. Thomas's mind raced, the air thick with foreboding. There was no marker, no indication of who or what had been buried there, but the precision of the digging suggested intention, purpose, and a story someone desperately wanted hidden. He knelt, his fingers tracing the loose earth, and the chilling realization settled over him that he had stumbled upon the remnants of secrets that the forest had kept, perhaps waiting for him to find them. The storm had passed, leaving a heavy silence that pressed down on the clearing, and Thomas felt the oppressive weight of eyes watching him, though no one was there. The hunter's discovery sent ripples through the town once he returned, though no one dared approach the cabin to investigate. Rumors erupted like wildfire. Some claimed Eleanor had returned, that she and Samuel had dug the graves themselves for reasons too terrible to speak aloud. Others whispered of darker possibilities, that the Mayfield curse had claimed victims again, that the sins of the past were repeating, as they always did in that family. The graves became symbols, manifestations of the fear and fascination the townspeople carried for generations. Children dared not venture near the woods, even in daylight, and adults avoided the trails that led to the cabin, their imaginations filling in horrors that might lurk beneath the turned soil. Even Thomas could not shake the unease. Night after night, he felt drawn to the clearing, as if something beneath the earth called to him, demanding attention. The graves were empty when he returned, yet he swore the soil had shifted slightly, as though disturbed again by invisible hands. The forest around the cabin seemed to lean in closer, the trees whispering in voices only he could hear. The discovery forced a reckoning with the past, exposing the hidden layers of Eleanor and Samuel's lives, the secrets they carried into the cabin, and the darkness that had always lingered in the shadows of the Mayfield family. The hunter's finding was more than a glimpse into the past, it was a sign that what had been buried was not gone, that the stories of love, obsession, and forbidden desire were not confined to memory, but alive, waiting, and dangerously close to surfacing in the present. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the forest was silent in a way that felt unnatural, as if it were holding its breath. The storm had passed, leaving the trees slick with rain and the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. But the cabin, the place where Eleanor and Samuel had spent those long, tension-filled nights, was empty. The door hung ajar, swinging slightly on its rusted hinges, and the fire inside had long since died to embers. No sign of them remained, save for the faint smell of tobacco and lavender, the rocking chair still trembling from unseen hands, and the echoes of conversations left unspoken. On the mantel lay a photograph, torn at the edges, depicting mother and son side by side, their faces strikingly similar, their eyes locked in a gaze that was impossible to interpret. It was as though the cabin itself had expelled them, preserving their memory but refusing to hold them within its walls any longer. The town awoke to rumors carried on the wind, fragments of stories that grew with each telling. Some claimed they had seen figures moving in the woods at dawn, disappearing into the dense undergrowth as if swallowed by the trees themselves. Others whispered that the Mayfields had vanished for good this time, taken by the forest, or perhaps by the sins that had haunted their family for generations. The photograph became a talisman, a tangible piece of a story that no one could fully comprehend. Those who glimpsed it felt a shiver of recognition, a sense that they were witnessing something both intimate and forbidden, a secret that belonged to the shadows rather than the daylight. The disappearance left a void that could not be explained. Locals spoke in low tones about the intensity of Eleanor and Samuel's bond, about the unnatural fascination that had drawn them together in ways the world was not meant to see. Children were warned once again to avoid the woods, and even seasoned hunters kept their distance, respecting some unspoken boundary that the cabin had always enforced. And yet, curiosity persisted. The photograph, the empty graves, and the cabin itself seemed to call to the living, as if demanding that the story continue, even without its main characters. In the weeks that followed, the mystery only deepened. The forest reclaimed the trails that led to the cabin, vines creeping over the doorframe, leaves carpeting the floor as though trying to erase all evidence of what had occurred. But the photograph remained, tucked into a corner of the mantel, a silent witness to the love, obsession, and darkness that had unfolded within those walls. It captured a moment that was at once intimate and terrifying, a frozen reminder that some secrets cannot be buried, some stories cannot end, and some bonds, no matter how unnatural, resist the passage of time, waiting for the next chapter to awaken in the shadows.